Hey, so I want to discuss a controversial figure who today is a much revered figure, but there is no escaping the fact that this person was, for a significant part of when he was in the public eye, a very controversial figure, something that a lot of people seem to have forgotten. The person I'm talking about is Muhammad Ali, the heavyweight boxing champion. It is fair to say that Ali transcended boxing, and almost certainly he's the most famous boxer ever. The only boxers that come close in terms of universal fame would perhaps be Mike Tyson, possibly in his day Joe Louis and Jack Dempsey. But I think it's fair to say Ali is the most famous boxer. Ask a casual boxing fan to name a famous boxer, they'll either say Ali or Tyson. So he is an interesting point of focus as a biographical point of focus. Now, one quick thing, I'm well aware of the situation he's in today with the Parkinson's, and that's unfortunate. I wouldn't wish that on anyone, so there's no malice in so far as the situation he's in now. But I don't believe that should excuse some of the things he's done in the past and some of the positions he's had, because as far as I know, he has never retracted these views. In fact, I know he hasn't. So that's why I do think it's legitimate to scrutinize some of them. I want to make this video to counter some of the narrative, because there are so many videos out there that are all about how Ali is speaking the truth and how wonderful he is and all the rest of it. And frankly, I'm sick of it because it's a huge distortion of facts. And I'm going to discuss some of the positions he had and counter the fallacies with those. Um, so I'm going to put a link, by the way, to this video because the clip that I've just watched, I think, sums up a lot of the problem with Ali's thinking. He was addressing some sort of rally against the Vietnam War. Of course, if you know much about Ali, you'll know that in the late 60s he was drafted. He refused to draft because he saw the war as morally wrong. He didn't see why he, as a black man, should go and kill, as he called it, yellow people in Southeast Asia from what he saw as a corrupt government. Now, I've no major issue actually with Ali's position on that on the surface, bearing in mind that there were many Americans who were morally opposed to the war, including many white Americans. Where I have a problem with is, once again, just like everything, Ali was turning it into a race issue. It's important that we do look at the context, but it's also important to take the context into consideration, and actually understand why, when some people use the context as an argument to justify Ali, it actually backfires. I'm going to explain why I think that is. So this is about 1968. It's the midst of the civil rights movement, very chaotic year in American history. It's the year Martin Luther King was assassinated, the year Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. It was the peak year of Americans being killed in Vietnam. Incidentally, I do understand why veterans, for example, would have strong views against Muhammad Ali, because they're risking their lives and in some cases losing limbs and so on the other side of the world, to have basically a radical stir up hatred at home, which is what Muhammad Ali was doing. He was a very divisive and hate mongering figure. There's no question about this. Um, so whatever his moral objections to the war, it doesn't change the way he went about it. Um, because what Ali was saying, and he's saying it again in the clip, "You are my enemy," and he's pointing to a group of what looks like white students. Now, anyone who has their head screwed on right would see there's something problematic in that. And I'm sick and tired of some black Americans coming on videos like this and saying, "Oh, you don't understand the way Ali is thinking because you're white." You see, this is the problem. If you see the world through a prism of race, if you immediately respond to someone based solely on their color of skin, that is the problem. And what irritates me about, in fact, what I deeply resent about that line of thinking, is it completely ignores the white Americans who not only supported the civil rights movement, but in many cases they took personal risk to do so. In fact, there were a few examples of white Americans, primarily from the North, being murdered. murdered for supporting the civil rights movement. There was an Italian American woman from New York City. I forget her name now, but she was featured in the film Selma. She was killed by Klansmen because she joined the civil rights movement, and there were other examples. Now, when the likes of Muhammad Ali comes out and says, "All white people are my enemy," as far as I'm concerned, he's insulting the courage of those people, and for those who make excuses for him. You know, people talk about the context. This was a time when black people were being persecuted. That is true, but what they're ignoring is the fact that there were many white Americans who knew it was wrong and were doing something about it, or at least trying to. Indeed, the president of the day, Lyndon Johnson, passed the Civil Rights Act, and he was doing what he could against racist segregationist governors. But here's an irony about Muhammad Ali that a lot of people, again, ignore. Muhammad Ali actually supported some of the racist policies of white supremacists. So Ali, for all the talk about being a proud black man, he actually supported some of the racist policies. He was for segregation, for instance. Now, tell me how the hell that was helping black Americans. Ali was just the reverse of the white supremacists. Now, okay, he may not have been doing persecution, excuse me, he may not have been persecuting in the same way, and obviously there is not the same history there. I fully get that. Obviously, black Americans were not keeping white Americans as slaves. White Americans weren't being lynched in the same way, and so on. I understand that. But my argument is Ali was essentially using the same racist, divisive rhetoric. And anyone who denies that is just being deliberately blind to the facts. That's what he was doing. And when I consider this, I think, well, wait a second, why on earth do we revere this man? As a boxer, sure, he was an incredible boxer. But Floyd Mayweather recently, when he was making those comparisons, he was talking about, oh, Ali stood up for the black man at a time when no one else did. That's factually wrong. I actually think Mayweather was doing it because he sort of felt compelled to. But that's not true. Ali was not standing up for the black man. In fact, among African Americans, Ali was a very divisive figure. You know, okay, he had his amicable side. You can see this picture behind me. That's when he met the Beatles. He had a humorous, amicable side, but there was a darker, more divisive side to Muhammad Ali that his apologists just won't accept. He was not only generalizing of all white people, he demonized other black people. He called Joe Frazier an Uncle Tom, which was disgraceful, given that Joe Frazier came from a far more hard scrabble background than Ali did. Let's not forget Ali came from a middle class background in Louisville. He was hardly the typical black man in America in the 60s. Okay, so I think the sheer ignorance of some of the things that Ali came out with, black supremacist is kind of same as a role model because that's what he was, a black supremacist. He joined a cult, the Nation of Islam, which was neither mainstream Islam or mainstream black. It just wasn't. People forget that today. It was a fringe organization, much like Black Lives Matter is today. Um, and if you got someone, a prominent black figure today who endorsed Black Lives Matter and got involved in the rallies and so on, there would be some scrutiny of that person because there's increasing scrutiny of Black Lives Matter, and in my view, justifiably so, for the reasons I laid out before. Um, I'm well aware there'll be people on this video coming out with racist comments against me. Go and fuck yourselves, okay? You don't intimidate me because the thing is, with people who are blindly apologetic for Muhammad Ali, they just won't hear any criticism whatsoever. They will not listen to the alternative argument. In their narrow mind, it is something like this: if you criticize Muhammad Ali, it's because you're a white racist. That is absolutely, if this was the mid 60s, I guarantee you I would be absolutely in support of the civil rights movement. People might say, well, why do you not support Black Lives Matter today? The reason is because of the tactics that they're using, not necessarily their argument, but because of the divisive tactics they're using and because of their inconsistency. Now, what the likes of Muhammad Ali believed was that Martin Luther King was basically too soft. Um, Ali's attitude was counter to Martin Luther King. He was not a unifying figure. He was a very divisive figure. What Ali basically wanted And he demonstrated this, by the way, with his opposition to mixed relations. So every time Ali spoke, he was making life harder for mixed couples, that is, black and white couples. One famous example, actually, was Betty and Barney Hill. They were famous in this. I don't want to detract from the video here, but they were famous for an alien abduction incident in New Hampshire that they alleged. Um, Barney Hill was a black man, Betty Hill was a white woman, but they were passionately in support of each other. They're a famous example. There are other examples. So when Ali came out with his rhetoric, all he was doing was making life harder for those people. And actually, it is significant to mention them because they were involved in the civil rights movement as well. Um, Also, as somebody who has been in mixed relations, I deeply resent the attitude that someone else would dictate who you should and shouldn't be with. I mean, the sheer hypocrisy of Muhammad Ali is quite profound. He also, during his Nation of Islam phase, he was very puritanical on the way women should behave. Yet he had no problem being a womanizer himself. In other words, he thought it was okay to dictate to his respective girlfriends not to dress in a certain way at his fights and so on, and yet he had no problem womanizing. So the man was a complete hypocrite. Um, and I just wish people would inform themselves a bit more his about the facts with this. Ali, as far as I'm concerned, was not a great human being. He was a divisive, in many occasions racist human being. He was a great fighter, no question about that. But I am just not going to join the bandwagon of blind adulation for this man because the facts counter that. And it's a pity because, especially in the boxing world, if you say anything against Muhammad Ali, it's immediately blasphemy. It doesn't matter if you put the caveat of acknowledging that he was a great fighter, because you will still be denounced. And I think that's very unfortunate. So many people have such a small mind that they cannot basically look at the facts. So you could argue, oh, it was the context of the time, but there's several points to that. Firstly, he has never retracted those views. Secondly, this thing about the context of the time, Muhammad Ali must have known that there was white people involved in the civil rights movement. He must have known that because it was a very high profile movement. Yet he still chose to publicly demonize all white people. And if you're a white liberal and you have no problem with that, then frankly, you're just being a little bit, I don't want to insult people, but you're being ignorant to the facts because if you're a white person and you want to make excuses for Muhammad Ali, you're basically endorsing racist attitudes towards white people. That's what it is. And I get that there wasn't the same institutional racism. I understand that argument. I really, really do. But it still doesn't justify the sort of attitude he had. Muhammad Ali can't claim that he didn't know any better because, this was a time when the civil rights movement was at the forefront. These issues were right out in the open. He couldn't pretend, he couldn't claim that he didn't know. I do think the Nation of Islam probably influenced him to a large extent and used him. It has happened before. Political organizations have used sports figures as part of their propaganda. In the case of the Nation of Islam, they used Muhammad Ali. And actually, in history, the Third Reich used Max Schmeling. Now, Max Schmeling was not a Nazi, but they did use him um, in much the way that the Nation of Islam used Muhammad Ali. And look, no one can honestly look at his rhetoric and tell me that that is not divisive, that that is not something negative. And when people come on and say he's only telling the truth, that's just the point. It's not the truth. It's a distortion of the facts. So when Ali says that and this is what really bugs me about some African Americans, the fact that they seem to be incapable of seeing white people as individuals. It's always about you white people. You white people this, you white people that. It's always about white people rather than just bigoted white people. If they're talking about the Ku Klux Klan, I'll join them in the condemnation. But the fact that they talk about all white people, that's the issue I take. It's just ignorant thinking. Um, and Muhammad Ali was one of the biggest trumpeters of that. If we look at his actual boxing life as well, um, great fighter, like I've already said, but not everything in the sport was necessarily positive. He popularized trash talking. Now, admittedly, some of his trash talking was entertaining, it was witty, it was funny, but there were definitely times when he overstepped the mark. Like I said with the Joe Frazier example, calling him an Uncle Tom, that had an impact on Frazier for years. Within the African American community, that's essentially like being called race traitor. That was an unforgivable thing for Ali to say. Um, it's my understanding that they made up before Frazier died, so that's good. But no, I don't think that Ali should be exonerated of all the divisive rhetoric that he used because he did not help matters in the 60s and 70s. He just didn't. I mean, I don't, this idea that he was a black role model, people forget the Nation of Islam was a fringe organization. The vast majority of African Americans in the 60s and 70s had nothing to do with either the Nation of Islam or the Black Panthers. It's a fact. And I understand, by the way, why those organizations came about because they saw the Martin Luther King approach as too apathetic. And on some level, I can understand that. If you have relatives lynched by white supremacists and then you're told to turn the other cheek, it does look fickle. So I understand that. But ultimately, there were racist organizations because they didn't just focus on white racists, they focused on all white people. Another point, Muhammad Ali secretly met the Ku Klux Klan. There's now documentary evidence to prove this. So I find it bizarre that black people would hail a figure who actually met the Ku Klux Klan. And I just hope that, Ali is getting on now. He's in his mid 70s. There may come a time soon that he passes away. And I hope that when there is the obituaries, when there is the sort of reflections on his life, it is honest. And I hope it isn't just all about blind praise. By all means, give him credit where credit is due as a great fighter. But I just don't accept that this man was as faultless as his fans make him out to be, and as above scrutiny as his fans make him out to be. Some of the things that Muhammad Ali said was just downright divisive, and you can't argue otherwise. And by the way, if you are a black person, I would hope that you have taken into account everything I've said. But if you come on this video and your first response is white guy talking about Muhammad Ali, therein lies a problem because you're judging me not by actually listening to what I'm saying, but purely because of the color of my skin. That is the problem. That is the problem. And incidentally, I'm going to remove racist comments um, against myself. I'm prepared to listen to other points of view, but I will remove any. Actually, I don't know if I will. Need to think about that. I might keep them to demonstrate the sort of mentality I'm talking about. But, you know, um, I just think it's a pity that people adulate someone without really considering their legacy, like really, really considering it. When you think about it, what did Muhammad Ali really do for black people? Insofar as, when he supported segregationist policies, when he supported racist attitudes towards all white people, when he was condemning other black people who, for example, married white people. Ali had some very, in my view, regressive attitudes. So don't tell me that I have to respect him. I respect him as a fighter, and in some areas he did show personal courage. But I'm not going to respect someone who sees me as the enemy. Fuck him.